dark moments and sometimes dark years. I intended the bulletin to introduce today to you that this is the first of a series of 3 messages that I'd like to share with you. And I'm calling the series Light in Dark Places. And this morning it's this story that has been read for us by Nancy. I want to take it from 4 different perspectives, 4 windows through which we look into the story. But first, let me return to that question. Have there been times in your life, in mine, when everything seems so dark and so distant, where we were discouraged and where things were just seemingly impossible? Well, in our story, the first window looks into the life of a young maiden. I want you to imagine the great difficulty that she was in because a raiding party from Syria had come and stolen, I guess, from numerous homes whatever they could take, and had taken her. We don't know if there were other children or other people that they took, but she was taken as a slave back into the country of Assyria. Now, Assyria was well known for its violence and its cruelty, absolute cruelty. They were considered more cruel than anyone else around, and so when they came into your community, they wanted to take over, and to resist them was impossible, and to try to resist them may have resulted in cruelty, especially in your life, and so the fear worked in their favor, and people often surrendered rather quickly. Well, this maiden is taken to a foreign country altogether, a foreign culture, a place where it seems no other Jewish people at all that live. And I want to imagine with you how dark it must have felt for her. Just snatched away, as it were, out of her bed at night, snatched away. We don't know if her parents were killed back home or still alive. We don't know if she had brothers or sisters, but we do know that she's taken away and becomes a slave girl described as a maiden in this far country. And I want you to imagine how dark that must have felt for her, and how impossible it must have felt. She's a servant in the home, but she's a prisoner. So they make sure that she's not going to get away, and of course if she did, what's a maiden girl going to do in crossing the many hundreds of miles to get back home in any case? So it looks totally impossible for her. And then in addition, she is imprisoned in the home of the commander of the whole armies of that country, who has a skin disease known as leprosy, and it's well known that this type of disease spreads from one to another. Her task has to be to look after whatever is given her to do. She can't say, I don't want to go into that room because the commander has touched things in there. Her task is to do whatever there is. And so how dark and how impossible and how difficult her circumstance must have been. Now she could have said to herself, poor me, and sunk into despair. And I'm sure we've pretty well all been there. Times that I've felt sorry for poor me. Or she could have taken another point of view and become hardened and not allow very much to affect her at all. And I'm sure you and I have come across people in life who are so hardened that the kindest deed you do for them doesn't seem to touch their heart. They're protecting themselves, so to speak, from difficulty around them and from people that have hurt them. Or a third approach could be to just look into her circumstances and to make the best of them. And so it seems that that's the choice of this amazing young maiden in this far country, that she decides she's going to face whatever in fact comes to her. And to do so cheerfully. It reminds me of the story of Nicholas Schenck, who was a multi-millionaire filmmaker in the United States. And we're told that he traveled and played, so to speak, with other people of wealth, and one day he was stepping on the yacht of a wealthy friend of his, and he turned and saw a young woman on the edge of the dock. And one might imagine that she was there contemplating the possibility of swimming or just looking around at the seagulls. And he had this uncontrollable urge to go over and push her in the water. Now, I don't recommend that. But he had this uncontrollable, seemingly, yes, he could have controlled it, but obviously it was a strong urge to go and do that. He went over and he pushed her from behind and shoved her in the water, and one would expect her to come up growling and unhappy, and he said that when she surfaced in the water, she just broke the most beautiful smile as she looked towards him. And he said in his heart and his thoughts, that's the girl I'm going to marry. Now, whether she had anything to do with it or not is another question. But that's the girl I'm going to marry. And according to the story, he did marry her. And I hope he was good to her. But it was her attitude that affected the situation so much. She smiled in the situation. She somehow or other took it the right way. And I believe that this maiden in our story takes it the right way as well. And so in the first window that we look into the story, we revisit her awful experience of being snatched away from home, from family, from loved ones, being carried away, I'm sure in the dark. How she was treated, we don't know. And ending up in such a place with leprosy around her and with no choice whatever to protect herself. And in the midst of that impossible situation, she tells her captors about the prophet in Israel. She could just as easily have hoped that Naaman the leper would get worse and worse, the leprosy would go all over his body, that his limbs would gradually get stunted, and the whole story of what leprosy can do, and that he would die, and maybe hope that she would get free. But no, she actually demonstrated a lesson that was going to be taught later to the people of Israel by the prophet Jeremiah. You find it in chapter 29, verse 7. Because he tells the people of God that when they were carried to Babylon, and this was years later, it's a lesson that the girl demonstrated without any precedent that I know of, that whenever they were carried into slavery, that it was important for them to remember that they were to seek and, I'm sure, pray for the prosperity of the people that had captured them. Now, it takes a big heart to grasp this, to pray for those that have done you dirt, that have harmed you, and in this case have brought you away to slavery, because as they prosper, so will you, says the Lord. Well, this girl in this particular story, as we look into window number 1, she passed the test, so to speak, and she decided she would tell her captors about the prophet in Israel, and she said, if only Naaman, the great commander, were with Elisha the prophet back in Israel, he would be healed. Now, she speaks this into a situation that was almost certainly totally impossible for the commander and his wife, because it wasn't usual for a leper to get better. Back in Israel, lepers had to stay away from the rest of society. They couldn't touch, they couldn't be present. They had to, I believe in cases, had to ring a bell warning people that they were in the neighborhood so that they could be avoided. Here's this girl who speaks words of faith and words of courage into the extreme darkness of a family, Naaman, his wife, and we don't know others in the family. And I want you to think of how this turned out. It was like taking a single little pebble, a word of faith, and dropping it in the water. And the ripples from that, the word she spoke was, if only my master could be in the presence of Elisha, he would be healed. And so the ripple from that, of course, reached the ears of the lady, her mistress or her owner, and she tells her husband, and we read the story that the ripples go from there to the king of Aram, and the king sends a letter over to the king of Israel. And so that brings us to window number 2. First is the window of misery in which the young maiden spoke these words of faith and of courage and of kindness to those that had been her captors. The second window is of King of Israel. And you know, when the letter arrives, it's on parchment. It is stamped with the signet ring of the king of Aram. And it says, I'm sending my servant to you so you can heal him of leprosy. And the panic that comes into the king's life, that's our second window as we look into that. And we see the panic. He tears his robes, which was an expression of fear and of disgust and worry and despair. So he tears his robes. And he speaks these words of despair to the people around him. And he says, I smell a rat here. The king of Aram expects me to receive this letter. And since I can't heal this man of his leprosy, I smell a rat. He surely wants to pick a fight with me. He wants to come and invade us. And so in this second window, we see somebody who leaves God out of the picture altogether. He never occurs to him that there's a prophet, only the distance that Belleville is away from Trenton. There's a prophet that near to him, a prophet through whom in his lifetime the Lord would conduct 13 different miracles. And if we use the sequence that Scripture gives us, this would have been number 8. And so the king should have known that 7 other miracles had already happened, and in very difficult, impossible situations, but he never thought, never spoke a word of turning to the Lord in prayer, bringing God into the picture, and of asking the prophet to help. So the second window then is a picture maybe of times when you and I have made decisions, faced situations, and worried and trembled, and, as it were, tore our robes, when in fact we could have turned to the Lord and found help. Then we come to the third of these windows. It is of the general or the commanding officer himself, whose name was Naaman. Think of how he traveled with all of the reward that he had. Talents of gold, how many 100 shekels of silver, and how many changes of raiment. All this reward to come and to, certainly to give to whoever would bring healing. Now, if you add together the value of those gifts just in Canadian dollars, US dollars, in fact, in the close of share value on Friday, a couple of days ago, you find that the gold is worth $2.2 million in our dollars, I should say in US dollars. And the silver is worth 200,000 plus at world prices. And these beautiful pieces of raiment, they likely had jewels sewn into them and made of the finest of fabrics, so we don't need to put a price on those. But here was a gift, bringing it, as it were, to purchase healing. And Naaman arrives in this country and he discovers that he has to wait and wait. He wouldn't know what's happening inside the king's palace, all the fretting and worrying. He would really know what's happening. But then he's brought instructions to go this other journey probably 12 miles away, Dothan, where we believe that Elisha the prophet lives, on a hill. Little hill, I guess we don't know details of that, but he makes that journey. Some of his people go on horseback, some of them in chariots, and others will walk. So it's a slow procession, and they make their way to Elisha. And in his mind, Scripture tells us, he's thinking about how this miracle is going to happen. Why, he can see the prophet coming down from the hill where he lives, greeting him as a man of dignity, and then looking at the part of the body that is infected with leprosy. And Naaman can just, in his mind's eye, see him just waving his hand over the infected area as though with magic. And when he does, that the situation improves and the leprosy is all gone. And so with that in mind, he arrives at the gate to the prophet's dwelling. And instead of the prophet coming down and saying to him, I'm going to do all this for you as you thought, he sends a messenger to him just with instructions. Go and wash in the muddy river Jordan. It's known to be muddy. Go and wash in the muddy river Jordan 7 times and you will be cleansed. So in this third window, we see the anger of Naaman rising, his pride, his anger coming up, and he says, why, our own rivers back in Damascus are clean, and wouldn't that be better for me to do? And the prophet, why, he didn't even leave his seat up there and come down and welcome me and make me feel important because I'm a great man. And so off he goes in rage. And the story carries on to tell us that as he goes on in rage and in anger, his servants intervene very gently. They've learned that you don't negotiate with somebody's rage and anger, but they come in gently and they say, my father. Title of respect, of course. If the prophet had told you to do something really difficult, you'd have done it, wouldn't you? And I'm sure he growled back, saying, yes, of course. Well, if he gave you now something very simple to do, why wouldn't you do it? It appeals to Naaman's logic. It is so simple and yet so true. And apparently he puts pride in his pocket. He puts humility in place of his anger and his haughtiness. By the way, that's good advice for me and you in all our circumstances. So he puts his anger aside and he goes and obeys as he's invited to do by his servants. And the story, as read for us today, reminds us that there is a God in Israel and there's a God in all of the world. And we've talked to him this morning, and we trust he's talking into our hearts right now. There is a God, and he brings healing into the physical body of this man, Naaman. So Naaman rises from the waters in joy. He's been touched, he's been healed, and he humbly and dutifully makes his way back from the Jordan River up to Dothan. And this time he comes to the gate as a very different person. He's not filled with his self-importance. He's not demanding something. He's really coming to say thank you to Elisha and to the God of Elisha for having come into the darkness of his life, into the impossibility of his life, and for bringing to him healing and a total new lease on life. And it seems to me that this time he gets to speak to Elijah because there's some conversation back and forth. And he, first of all, expresses his appreciation. And then we notice in this third window, I should say this fourth window, we notice in this particular window of his life that he offers a gift this time. It's not to pay for future healing, it's a thank you gift. And the prophet turns it down and saying, this is by the grace of God. He's dealing with a person from a far country. He doesn't want to go home, want the man to go home thinking, I've made a good bargain. It was well worth all this gold and silver and raiment. He wants him to go home with a lesson that the grace of God means grace. It's free, as it is to me and you. And so Naaman then has his interaction with the prophet, and we discover that he knows instinctively that when you go home and you begin your duties again, it will require you to go into the temple of Rimmon, which, by the way, is another name for the god of Baal that was worshipped. There's a list of at least a half a dozen countries, all of whom worshipped Baal at the same time, but they gave Baal different names. And so here in Assyria, apparently they worshipped Baal according under the name of Rimmon, and the image they used was that of a pomegranate. And so Naaman is saying to the prophet, when I go back home, I have duties to perform, and I will be going with the king into his house of worship, where he worships Rimmon, and my duty is that he will lean on my arm, or as some translations say, he will lean on my hand, suggesting the closeness of the king to his first commander. And when I go in, and when he bows, I need to bow, or of course my head will be taken off as an insult. So when I bow my head, may the Lord God of Israel, whom I will serve from this day forward, may he forgive that outward act, knowing that in my heart I will only serve God and him alone. You see, instinctively he seems to know from the very beginning that worship of idols is not acceptable to the Lord God of heaven. And it's true for me and you as well. It's true for all humanity. One of the Ten Commandments says that we shall not make any graven images, we shall not bow down to them, we shall not worship them. And then the last of these windows is that unfortunate life of Gehazi, or Gehazi, whichever way you wish to pronounce it. He's been the servant of Elisha for years. Now, Elisha, according to whatever I can see in Scripture, had what we call a school of prophets. And he may have had more than a little 2x4 that he lived in. It may have been large enough to house these prophets. And if you go on into one or two chapters a little later in 2 Kings, you discover that the prophets asked him to enlarge the house so there was enough room for all of them to live there. They were learning from the example of Elisha, being trained and taught. And so I want to say that Gehazi was apparently the one among all the prophets who poured water on the hands of Elijah, so to speak, when he would go to do things and wanted his hands to be ceremonially clean. Then his closest servant would pour water on his hands, and there was a way where it was poured in one way and the water ran down towards the wrists, and then it was poured the other way and the water ran off, symbolizing the cleansing. And so Gehazi had the closest of relationships with Elisha. And he had watched these other 7 miracles taking place and lives being changed and the power of God coming through and coming down. And he knew what it was all about a clean and a good and a proper and a pure life. But temptation knocked on his doorway. And you'll notice from the Scripture that there were some downward steps that he took. Important downward steps, and the first of these was where he gave in to what we would call resentment. He said the Lord, no, he didn't bring the Lord in the picture. He said, this enemy of ours has been let off much too easy. Elisha should have taken gifts from him, and so he felt that this enemy needed to be paid back in some way. cost him something. He's our enemy, and the resentment then led to what we can either call greed or covetousness, because he decided that he wanted some of those pieces of gold and silver and raiment. And it leads then to a third step where he concocts a lie in the name of his master and goes out and says, "My master has sent me to ask for some of these things." He carries with the servants back to the foot of the hill, and then we read that he takes the gold bags from them and raiment, whatever he has sent, and he hides it in the house. And for some reason, I tend to think that this dwelling is probably built into the hill, and that there's a lower quarters and downstairs, maybe like we would think of a basement. But he hides these gifts in the house. Then he goes to stand before his master, guilty but pretending to be innocent. And it takes us a little bit farther in the story, where Elisha asks him where he's been, and he covers up his previous lie and his greed and his hiding the gifts he's now got. He covers it up with yet another lie. And I think you and I understand that language. I think that in our growing up days at least, that we know how it is to have told one lie and then have to cover it up with another. And if you don't, I do. Gehazi did that. He said, "Master, I didn't go anywhere," but in fact he had done all this. And then in this fourth window we discover, unfortunately, that the leprosy that was taken away from Naaman is going to rest on Gehazi and his family for the rest of time. Quickly, as we close, I want to share with you what I think are a few lessons that come from this. The first is that in the most dark and difficult times of your life and mine, we can still light a candle in somebody else's life. Just as the little girl took the pebble of faith and dropped it into the ocean of dark water around her, and the ripples went first of all to Naaman, went to his king, went to the king of Israel, came to Elijah. So who can tell where the ripples of your obedience and your love and your courage and your faith can go as you and I try to obey? Or secondly, we think of the turmoil that came into the life of the king when he failed to take God into the picture, and how often in our lives that may have happened, where you or I may have started out on something and not taken God into the picture, or despaired over situations that are coming our way instead of taking it to the Lord in prayer. The third lesson we might take is of Naaman the commander, who with his pride was just about ready to miss the wonderful blessing God wanted to give him, and that's happened in my life, and I'm sure in yours, where pride always comes before a fall, and he very nearly missed God's best in his life until his servants invited him to come down from his perch of pride and humbly to try what had been offered. Then we think of how Elisha teaches us that this ministry, ministering to the needs of others, is never a time to take advantage of them. Elijah put it this way: is it a time to accept money and to accept clothing and olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male and female slaves? No, he wishes to serve an enemy without taking advantage of him. And Christian ministry for all of us is something that comes free from the Lord, and we're invited, even as we sing that familiar song, "Freely you have received, freely give." It's the grace of God. And then lastly, servant Gehazi, he teaches us a lot too about the slippery slope of resentment leading to covetousness and leading to lies and hiding and more lies, and eventually reaping the rewards of our deception. Lord lead any and all of us in the choices and the decisions that he brings before us. May he remind us of his goodness and how he loves the enemies that any of us might have in this world. And above all, that everybody, including the Assyrians, including the Gentiles, including your next door neighbor or mine, including anyone that we know, everyone needs the Lord. Amen. Oh Lord, our God, we know that your heart breaks for this world. We know that we are called to be a light in dark places. And now we thank you that this little girl in the midst of misery and great darkness, let her light shine. Help us in our difficult times to know we're not alone and to know that we too can pierce the darkness by lighting our light of testimony in Christ's name.